Today I'd like to talk about the third way that things are dependent on other things. So I've been giving a kind of series of talks about dependent arising, attempting to connect what we're learning from Geshe Tapke in the class on the Sutra of the Rice Seedling Sutra with the theme of the retreat, the 4 establishments of mindfulness. And so dependent arising is said to be the best reason, the monarch of reasons for understanding emptiness, very important topic. And the usual way of explaining dependent arising is in terms of 3 ways that phenomena are dependent on other things. And I don't know about you, but the term emptiness sounds kind of really exciting and mystical and interesting. But the term dependent arising, I don't know. It sounds kind of technical, not so exciting. But I've come to warm up to it over the years and find, whoa, it's really interesting. And so far I've talked about the first 2 ways that things are dependent. First is on causes and conditions, which is pretty obvious, easy to understand. We can see it in the garden, we can see it in the kitchen. You have to put things together in order to have a result. And then the second way that things are dependent is on parts. Everything is made up of parts, and without those parts, the object wouldn't exist. You take away all the parts, nothing's left. So that's pretty easy to understand as well. So today, I'm going to attempt to talk about the third way, which is not so easy. And I feel a little scared talking about this in front of Geshe-la and Venerable children. I might not say it in the right way. So please point out if I say something wrong. I don't want to deceive people. So this third way that things are dependent is on sometimes it's called mental labeling or mental designation. So the mind and its way of conceptualizing and labeling things. So first I'll read what Geshe Tapke says about this. That way at least some of my words will be correct. So on page 22 of his book, the Rice Seedling Sutra, he says, thus, the term dependent arising applies to all phenomena, because all phenomena are dependent on their basis of imputation, their parts and so forth, and then are established as an object of the mind in relation to that basis of imputation and independence on imputing terms and concepts. In other words, it refers to phenomenon being dependent on their parts and so forth, being apprehended as the basis of imputation, and then being established in dependence on imputation by terms and concepts. So that might sound a lot kind of difficult, but he goes on to give an example, and he uses the kind of classic example of a carriage or a chariot. That's the one you find in the scriptures, but we can replace that with a car, because that's something we're much more accustomed to. So he says, for instance, the establishment or existence of a car is completed when you identify its parts, the wheels, chassis, and so on, which are apprehended as the basis of imputation, and then conceptually impute to them the conventional designation car. Therefore, car is established in dependence both on its parts and on imputing terms and concepts. So it seems that the third way of dependence is connected with the second way, because the second way is looking at the parts of things, and then understanding that things are made up of parts. It makes it easier to understand how things are just labeled in relation to their parts. And so in this third way that things are dependent, the parts of an object, the parts that make up an object, have this term basis of imputation. They're called basis of imputation or basis of designation. And then in dependence on those, the mind has concepts and gives labels. So let's look at the picture. Last time when I was talking about the parts, I showed a number of pictures, photographs by this Canadian photographer, Todd McClellan, who likes to take things apart and photograph them. So I like this one. This is the toaster. It's a little less complicated than a car, not as many parts. And I like toasters. I like toasted bread. So toaster is a kind of an object that I'm fond of. And so when it's taken apart like this, we don't see a toaster. I mean, you really have to kind of look at those parts and think about them and figure out, oh, those are the parts of a toaster. But the toaster itself doesn't really appear. And also, it doesn't function as a toaster. You can't toast your bread on this. If you came into the dining room in the morning and you saw this, you'd probably be pretty upset. You want to make toast, and look what somebody's done. But we can still look at the parts and figure out, oh, those are the parts of a toaster, because that's something we're familiar with. And then when the parts are put together, next picture, it'll probably look something like this. So now we do see a toaster, and we can plug it in and put our bread in, and it works as a toaster. So it functions as a toaster. So when all the parts have been put together like this, and we look at it and see it, it probably appears to be inherently, independently, objectively existing. And this is actually kind of subtle. It's not so easy to recognize this mode of appearance that the Prasangika said. We see everything like that. But it's very subtle. And I think it's also so habitual, so automatic that, we really have to dig deep and watch our mind to observe it. But they say that this is how everything appears to us, as if there's a solid, real, objectively existing, independently existing object there. And I find it easier with objects that stir up emotions, like something you're really attached to or you really hate, really have a lot of aversion to. When those kind of objects appear, I think it's easier to catch a glimpse of how it appears so real and solid and independent. With a toaster, unless maybe if it was Queen Elizabeth's toaster and you bought it at an auction and you paid millions of dollars for it and you got it sitting there in your house, you'd probably be pretty excited about it. So it might be easier to see it as catch this appearance as inherently existing. But anyway, let's just say that, yeah, we do see things as inherently, independently existing. But then we need to check, to investigate, do things exist that way? So if the toaster or any object did exist that way, if it was inherently or independently existing, we should be able to find it. We should be able to point to something and say that is the toaster right there. And so we're advised to search for it, to search for the toaster. And the most obvious place to search is among the parts. So if we could go back to the past picture, previous one. Yeah, so those are all the parts of the toaster. So can we point to any of those parts and say that's the toaster? Are any of those parts a toaster and able to function as a toaster? I mean, we can probably say, of course not. But it's actually good to go through the process and look at the parts one by one and really, decide for ourselves that that is not a toaster. Also, if we could point to any of the parts as the toaster and say that's that one there, that one is the toaster, then that means we could throw away all the other parts and just keep that one, and it would function as a toaster. So, I mean, we can try that, but it's pretty easy to see that isn't the case. So then we may think, well, what about the collection of the parts? I mean, obviously none of the individual parts is a toaster, but when you put them all together, you have all the the collection of the parts. That's the toaster. So I used to get really stuck on that one, and I think many people do as well. So what Chandrakirti says in response to that is, well, if you say that the collection of the parts is the toaster, then here's a toaster. You have all the parts there. All the parts are there, so there should be a toaster there. So that's meant to dispel that idea. But what I find helpful too is thinking that what is a collection? We say collection, but is a collection something we can point to, something we can put our finger on? A solid, real thing? Where's the collection? So collection too is just a name, just a term we give to a group of things that have something in common. You know, like people have stamp collections, or coin collections, or art collections. But where is the collection other than just that group of parts? It isn't a separate thing, a real thing we can point to. So I find that helpful to dispel the idea of the collection being the parts. But we need to go through this. We need to, you know, investigate this on our own and see for ourselves. And so if we search through the parts and we can't find the toaster in any of the individual parts, nor in the collection of the parts, where is it? So some people might think, well, there is no toaster. It doesn't exist at all. So they say that conclusion is wrong and is actually quite dangerous. It's the extreme of nihilism. And if you go down that road, then you think, okay, there's no toaster. Oh, maybe there's also no people, no sentient beings, no Buddha, no samsara, no nirvana, no karma. Ooh, I can do whatever I want. So that's actually a very dangerous route to go down. So you could become extremely reckless, do all kinds of negative things, thinking, doesn't matter, I can do whatever I want. Or you could become mentally ill. So we need to be careful not to go down that road. So the Prasangika philosophers like Nagarjuna, Chandrakirti, Lama Tsongkhapa, are not denying the existence of things. They're not saying there's no toasters and no people and so on. They're simply denying a certain mode of existence, independent existence, inherent existence, objective existence. So that mode of existence is false. That's what's being refuted. And they are saying that things do exist. They exist conventionally. How? How do they exist conventionally? As merely labeled, or to use Geshe Tapke's words, a toaster is established in dependence both on its parts and on imputing terms and concepts. So this process of the mind looking at the parts and having concepts, conceptualization about it, and then giving names or labels. And I think this process of naming and labeling doesn't necessarily have to mean language, words like human beings use, because our kitties, I think they have definite concepts about different people. They obviously, you know, are much more happy when they see the person who gives them food and scared when they see a stranger come along. So I think their minds label in some kind of way, not necessarily with language. That's my view, but that's not normally talked about in the teachings. And so then applying this to body, which is one of the four establishments of mindfulness, one of the objects of your practice during the retreat. So the next one, yeah. So I was trying to find a picture of a body with its parts, and I came across this. You can buy these on Amazon. I thought maybe we should get one for the Abbey. That would be very helpful. So anyway, this is some parts of a body. So when we see, you know, something with a head and arms and legs and torso and maybe even other parts as well. So this is the basis of imputation for body. Okay, this collection of parts is the basis of imputation, and then our mind conceptually imputes the term body. So body then is just a term, a label that at least English-speaking people who speak other languages have other terms, but those of us who know English, we use that particular combination of letters and syllables, body, to refer to this collection of parts. And if you try to find the body, if you try to find one thing you can point to as being body, you can't. All you can find are parts of a body, and a part of a body is not a body. So body can't be found when you search for it, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It does exist. We do have bodies. Bodies exist. They need to be fed, just coming soon. But the way they exist is not independently, intrinsically, inherently existing, but rather as labeled by the mind. So the mind with thoughts and concepts and labels referring to this collection of parts, independence on this collection of parts, has this name or label, body. And this is true for everything else that exists, toasters and cars and tables and chairs and mountains and trees and enlightenment, Buddhas, and so on and so forth. So they all exist in that way. So this is just a tiny bit of information about this, but it's something you could talk about for days, weeks, months, years. It's very, very deep, very profound. So I hope this is something you can incorporate in your meditations when looking at these four objects: body, feelings, mind, and phenomena. This is the most important thing to understand about phenomena, although it's subtle and difficult, but very, very important for our practice, our spiritual development, especially becoming a Buddha, enlightened, and helping all living beings be free of suffering. Thank you.